I welcome you back to our continuing look, examination, and study of the Gospel of Matthew. I will be reading out of Olaf Norley's translation for this next reading. Matthew chapter 26 and beginning at verse 50. But Jesus said to him, "Friend, what do you come for?" Then they came up to Jesus and laid their hands on him and arrested him. At this, one of the men with Jesus drew his sword and gave a servant of the high priest a blow, cutting off an ear. "Return your sword to its place," Jesus said to him. "For all who take up the sword will die by the sword. Don't you believe that if I ask my Father even now, he will send more than 100,000 angels? And how else could the scriptures be fulfilled which say that it has to be this way?" At the same time, Jesus spoke to the rabble. "Why have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me? It, as, if, as though I were a robber. I have been with you daily, teaching you in the temple, but you have never laid hands on me before. But this has all taken place so that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled." The disciples then all deserted him. They fled. The most iconic image in this portion of scripture is what Peter did. We know it is Peter from the parallel account of the Gospel of John chapter 18 and verse 10. It was Peter who struck the ear of this high priest's servant. We rightly focus on what Judas Iscariot did. We know that once Jesus is arrested, Peter will deny Jesus 3 times. We understand in those acts of denial, Peter was betraying his friend and Lord. Yet when we look at the garden scene, we see where Peter, like Judas, betrayed Jesus. The 3 denials of Peter get all the attention, and what Peter did in the garden generally does not get the same sort of attention. I mean, not his attempt to do reconstructive face surgery of this one individual. I mean by the fact that how Peter betrayed the vision of life that Jesus gave to him. In a world obsessed by violence, regardless of the age you live in, it does not matter to somehow think that one age has, it over another. Forget it. Every age of human society has had its level of brutality and violence. It is pretty easy to accept in that context what Peter did with his sword. It is pretty easy to say that that sleazy slime bag of a temple cop got exactly what he deserved. We understand that only too well if you've watched enough movies, that there are people who just absolutely deserve to die. And if they suffer some form of grotesque violence, well, who cares? They got what they had coming to them. And this temple cop, in a sense, was no different. Who was he to think that he could arrest the pure Son of God and get away with it? You see, it is easy to look at this event and realize how much Peter had failed Jesus at this point. Where was the internalization of the teaching of Jesus on love and forgiveness? Again, go back several chapters now. How many times were you to forgive Peter? 7 times? 7 times 70? Or, in other words, was Peter absent that day when Jesus took aside his apostles and explained that the nature of the kingdom of God was fundamentally different than the kingdoms of this world? It may be that Peter had seen, well, if you're old enough to remember this, one too many Zorro movies. You see, Peter, in standing up for Jesus in his own way, in a real sense, betrayed Jesus as much as Judas Iscariot did. You see, the message of Jesus cannot be separated from the life of Jesus. Now, on one level, that is a false statement, for people all the time try to separate the message of Jesus from the life of Jesus. The danger in the church is not that we will one day deny the centrality of the scripture or that Jesus is fully divine and fully human. And here, I guess you could say I have my sights set exactly on the evangelical church. You know, I've said this before that the besetting sin of the evangelical church is legalism, because we believe in the centrality and importance of Scripture, and we elevate that importance. But the problem is we can hold to that and hold to the reality of Jesus and not actually be living out the life of Jesus. You see, we can reduce the message of Jesus to an ideology that becomes divorced from real life. You see, Peter, in that sense, is not the, excuse me, in that sense, is not the last person who to try to make Jesus' vision of life fit into the prevailing practices of his day. You see, Peter, in that one blow, showed how little he actually grasped the message of Jesus. The end of verse 56 is sad but realistic once you see what Peter did. You see, when you reduce the Christian message to an ideology and then wed it to the prevailing cultural values, you get this result. The disciples, they fled. They took off. They didn't stay around to check things out. The apostles had spent, well, maybe 3 years with Jesus and were still clueless about what he was about. They had heard the wonderful stories and saw the amazing miracles, and still they did not get it. They did not see Jesus was not just telling truths, but also calling them to live a life in a fundamentally different way. That's what we're talking about. You can hear the truths and affirm the truths and believe in the truths, but if your life is not really any different than the lives of those in the culture around you, you have absolutely none of Jesus's teaching in your life. You see, there's no merit if people are intellectually Christian and daily in life practicing pagans. And as an aside here, I would say this is a very strong passage about the nature of Christian ministry, where Christian ministry gets reduced to the running of the church and what must make the church go forward. We can do all those things and never deal with how our lives must be absolutely changed and transformed by Jesus's life and lifestyle. To be a Jesus person is to see that the message is only embraced as it is actually lived out. If we are not living the message of Jesus, then we cannot say we have fully understood the message of Jesus.